Hello, my name is Ethan Graham. I'm an electrical engineering major at Texas A&M University. This is my first episode of my podcast, Has God Spoken? Defending a Christian biblical worldview in the STEM fields. So my main goal of this program, personally, as a Christian going into very secular STEM fields surrounded by secular people and ideas, to have a firm and solid foundation of defense for my faith and to help others have similar strength and defense in their faith. So in this episode, specifically, we'll be discussing the historic evidence and different arguments that support the prophecy of the destruction of Tyre in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 26, and answer some common objections to this prophecy as well. So to give a quick background, the book of Ezekiel is written by Ezekiel, who was a Jew during the Babylonian captivity. His prophecies are dated by a consensus of biblical scholars from his first prophecy, his first vision being around 593 BC, and his second vision being in his last prophecy in 573 BC. In Harold Henry Rowley's book, The Book of Ezekiel in Modern Study, he goes through the consensus of biblical scholars' dating of the reasoning behind their dating of this. So we can start off just simply by reading chapter 26 of the book of Ezekiel, then go through a brief history of the city of Tyre, and then some common objections. So I'll be reading from the English Standard Version. I'll go through a few verses and highlight some key points of the prophecy. So chapter 26, book of Ezekiel, verse 3 says, "Behold, I am against you, O Tyre, and I will bring up many nations against you, as the sea brings up its waves. They shall destroy the walls of Tyre and break down her towers, and I will scrape her soil from her and make her a bare rock." Moving to verse 7, "Behold, I will bring against Tyre from the north Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon." Moving to verse 12, "Your stones and your timber and your soil will be cast into the midst of the waters." In verse 14, "You shall never be rebuilt." So we can highlight three major points of this prophecy: that many nations will rise up against Tyre in waves, like a sea. In verse 7, one of them will be King Nebuchadnezzar. It highlights that he's the one that will break down their walls. And then another point, your stones and timber and soil will be cast into the waters. So it looks like their rubble or their remains will be thrown into the ocean. And then lastly, you shall never be rebuilt. So those are the about four major points to highlight of this prophecy. So now that we've gone through that, I'll give a brief history of the ancient city of Tyre. It was located in the modern-day city of Tyre. It's on the southern coast of Lebanon, and it was the capital city port of the Phoenician Empire. In Mariner's journal, The Ancient City of Tyre and Its Harbors, he talks about how the city of Tyre was a major port city of the Phoenician Empire. And so today, the city of Tyre consists of a peninsula connected to the mainland, but originally this wasn't the case. It was actually a mainland with a sister island off of its coast. But we're going to see that as a result of Alexander the Great's conquests, the neighboring sister island was actually connected and transformed into a peninsula because of the silt buildup on the land bridge that Alexander the Great constructed to bring his army across the ocean to invade that sister island city. Siaska discusses about how this happened, how the sister island was connected to the mainland in his book, The Phoenicians. So first we'll look at the historical scholars' findings on King Nebuchadnezzar's siege of Tyre. So scholars have a consensus that his siege of Tyre began around 586 BC, and it lasted about 13 years until 573 BC. In Volgstein's book, Nebuchadnezzar's Reconquest of Phoenicia, he talks about the dating of this siege. So Ezekiel's prophecy is dated about 7 years prior to the start of Nebuchadnezzar's siege. Nebuchadnezzar finally broke down the walls of Tyre in 573 BC, but by that time, the majority of the city of Tyre had already evacuated with all of their valuables and their loot to the neighboring sister island off of the coast. So without any way to get his troops across the nearly 1 mile gap between the island and the mainland, Nebuchadnezzar just looted what he could from the mainland city that he had broken into and then left mostly empty-handed. And this is where the common objections start to come into play against Ezekiel's prophecy, saying that because Nebuchadnezzar left and did not fully conquer the city of Tyre, this leaves the prophecy unfulfilled. But if we remember from what we read before in the prophecy, that it said many nations would rise against Tyre like waves of the sea. The only thing that the prophecy specified that King Nebuchadnezzar would do would be break down the walls. It didn't specify that Nebuchadnezzar would fully conquer all of Tyre, including the island, sister island. So this is where Alexander the Great comes in. A little less than 250 years later, he also sieged the island of Tyre in about 332 BC. So after a compelling victory in 333 BC at the Battle of Issus, Alexander marched his army to Phoenicia, where he then met with Tyre and called for them to surrender, since he had such a massive reputation. He usually just gave people the chance to surrender, and commonly they did. But Tyre did not comply. They're very prideful of their navy. So then Alexander, not wanting to back down for fear of his reputation, began constructing a causeway across the 1 mile gap to the island using the rubble of the demolished mainland city, its timber and its stone and etc., as is specified in Ezekiel's prophecy, like he predicted. So Alexander the Great eventually completed his causeway. He did face a lot of issues along the way with missiles being shot from the city, a lot of bumps in the road, but eventually he did complete the causeway and conquered the city completely, as in the World History's website article on Alexander's siege of Tyre says that he eventually did conquer the city and left it in ruins. Now, looking to modern-day Tyre, this is where more objections come into play, because at the end of the prophecy it says the city will never be rebuilt. So with the modern city of Tyre being built, does that mean that the prophecy was failed? That's what a lot of skeptics try to claim, that the prophecy failed because it was rebuilt. But there is a very clear distinction between old Tyre and new Tyre. Being rebuilt more accurately would mean to be restored. And this massive port capital of the major world empire is still sunk and sitting in the ocean. It was never restored or rebuilt in the sense that it was in its former glory. So while a modern city has been built nearby, which has the name of Tyre, it's mostly just a small-time fishing area, nothing that could even be closely comparable to the capital major city port that it once was. And this does closely tie to another verse in the prophecy in verse 5. It says, "Your land will become a place to spread fish nets." So commonly the modern city of Tyre is generally just for small-time fishing. So this concludes our first episode on the prophecy of the destruction of Tyre. I hope you had some helpful information that would strengthen your faith and help you defend against people who attack or oppose biblical truth. And come back next time and we'll be talking about the prophecy of the destruction of Belshazzar's kingdom in the book of Daniel. Thank you for listening.